We told you that the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation is holding a seminar where they're taking stock of the geopolitics at play, and it comes as the world is grappling with the looming tariffs from the United States set to kick in on the 1st of August. That is this Friday. The seminar is taking stock of that and everything else that's underway. President Cyril Ramaphosa, special envoy to America, Mcebisi Jonas, is actually part of those proceedings. He's currently speaking at the podium. I wonder if we can just listen in for you, just for a moment, just to capture the essence of his message there. Let's listen in.
New forms of multilateral cooperation and new partnerships for development might be forged. The global crisis offers an opportunity for change. The question, of course, is how will South Africa and the rest of the continent respond? Beyond the rise of China, the wave of the future must certainly be African. Every year, millions of young people in Africa come of age, ready to work, innovate, and contribute to their communities and global economy. Europe's population has begun to decline, and China has also peaked below 1.5 billion people. The UN projects that India's population will peak at 1.7 billion and begin to fall in the decade ahead. By the middle of the century, Africans will number 2.5 billion out of the world's population of 10 billion. Of course, the question would be, what do we do with that demographic dividend? But Africa has not fared well in the geopolitical shocks of the last decade. And the narrative of Africa rising has been severely dented. Now, in the context of failing commodity prices, the combination of slower growth, global growth, and higher interest rates has tipped many African countries into debt distress. For others, the rising burden of debt is crowding out vital investment in economic and human development, as noted by Joseph Stiglitz in the Jubilee Commission report. Increased protectionism threatens an abrupt end to market access, including the possible future of AGOA and the spectre of European Union's CBAM tariffs. Added to this is the long-term scaling down of overseas development aid to the continent, as many countries shift funding to militarization. Africa, however, continues to attract investment into commodity sectors, but a new scramble for the continent's assets is not only proving destructive to the environment, but is also engulfing the continent in conflict. As growth slows in the rest of the world and the marginal return on investment declines, Africa offers the best prospects for investment and development returns. The most important response to the threat of tariffs has been intensified focus on regional integration. Africa made progress with ACFTA, but the current crisis must spur more stronger action in that regard. There is clamor for survival in a context of the current global tariff impasse and inertia in the World Trade Organization, where no new market access in negotiations are taking place. South Africa should expand trade to new markets in Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, while strengthening trade and investment relations with North America and Europe. Export diversification is a key imperative that South Africa should take up as part an insurance against market concentration, but also as a source of resilience. For South Africa and Africa as a whole, the economic implications of China's growth and consequent reconfiguration of global economy are somewhat contradictory. China has become a large investor in African development. This is, I'm sure, most welcome. But it also means that China is increasingly a large creditor to African countries. And that comes with the potential for tensions and misunderstanding that bedevil debt relationships. Political imperatives for cooperation have, in the past, collided with the global consequences of China's growth, of the growth model of China, which is focused on very high rates of investment in physical infrastructure. This has sustained a historic global boom in the prices of primary commodities on which many African countries are dependent heavily. China has also become a leading global producer of labor-intensive manufacturing, and its unparalleled capacity to supply these goods reduces their prices on the world markets, making it difficult for many nations to compete. While South Africa and African consumers benefit significantly from lower prices for clothes and other wage goods, the consequences of this are dire for many economies in Africa. In many instances, it promotes deindustrialization, and in many instances, it actually cuts unemployment quite severely. In many ways, we can say that China's relations with the continent still resemble pretty much the colonial relations of the past. And that's something that I think we have to take up in a very strong way. South Africa is in the unique position of being the largest trading partner in sub-Saharan Africa for the US, China, the European Union, and UK. South Africa is also one of the 11 members of the BRICS bloc, and I think Stavros will attest, and holds the presidency of G20 during a very momentous year. But foreign policy can be a powerful motivator for patriotism, bringing South Africans together behind a shared vision. And that's what you find when you look at Brazil and other countries, how foreign policy brings and stirs up patriotism. But the recent experience of South Africans spreading disinformation and campaigning against our country is counterintuitive and destructive at best to the national interest. Our foreign policy must, of course, be grounded on a clear set of values and principles that unite the people of South Africa. These principles are set out in the Constitution, which places democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights at the core of our approach, alongside with healing the divisions of the past. The Freedom Charter also articulates the political principles that should inform international relations. The Charter specifically calls on South Africa, I quote again, strive to maintain world peace and settlement of all international disputes by negotiations, not war, and to do so in close cooperation with other African countries. These core principles, whilst fundamentally important, are only half of the story. For South Africa to be effective and to have an effective response to the global crisis, it requires us to be clear-eyed about our national interest. Ideally, this will be founded on a consensus that unites South Africans about our national identity, the path of economic growth, and the investment required to overcome South Africa's deep social crisis. Building on common definition of national interest, we could then look soberly at the world and identify the opportunities and threats that the world presents, and maybe answer some of the questions more courageously that are raised on the slide. The imperative to actively rewire South Africa's production should have nothing to do with nostalgia or sentiment. We cannot be locked into an imagined ideological struggle that reflects conflicts of a bygone era. Rather, we should leverage our foreign relations to advance trade and attract capital, and investment in South Africa and tap into growing global markets. Ideally, we should position ourselves as a middle power at the intersection of the supply chains of the West and East, a stable platform for investment in Africa for all those with capital and good intentions. We should, among the countries such as Brazil, should be counted amongst the countries such as Brazil and India that can leverage their capabilities and historical relations across the geopolitical space. Our credentials as a democracy, as an open market, as a reliable partner for trade and investment and economic opportunity, and as a good citizen of the world should be unquestionable. We are the most developed platform for investment in the continent, into the continent, and we must urgently rebuild our reputation as the best and most transparent financial services sector. And I think the good work that's done on exiting the grey listing is part of that. Beyond this, how should South Africa respond to the current global crisis and position itself in the new world? I suggest a couple of things. The first is African and regional integration. Other parts of the world have responded to the global crisis by taking bold actions to strengthen national and economic blocs, investing more heavily in cross-border infrastructure and institutions that can yield substantial economic benefits for the countries. Beyond the region, we need to leverage our strategic position. We also need to champion Africa at global forums such as G20 on issues of debt relief, conflict resolution, health and vaccines, climate change, etc. Africans should demand a fair shot to get their manufactured good and agricultural produce into markets of the rich world. We should strive to promote better commerce and common interest between key cornerstone economies. And if you think about it, the trade levels between the big economies of the continent is almost negligible. And I think that's something that I think, as part of the new strategy, we should increase. Probably we should also consider connecting the big economies of the country into some kind of a structure, a G7 type grouping in Africa. That's something to ponder on, Zain. The USA remains a central player in global development. South Africa's relationship with the US is crucial, and it is not transactional, but based on a long partnership rooted in shared values of democracy, justice, and progress. In the immediate term, South Africa is engaged in negotiations with the US to reach a solution on the tariff impasse. But beyond that, I think there is a conversation going on improving the relations between the two countries. EU countries still offer the largest export market for value-added South African products. We should strengthen that. China is another important one. I can see that I should stop. Let me conclude, though. South Africa is a non-aligned strategic middle power, balancing national economic...
We've been listening to Mcebisi Jonas speaking at the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation's special seminar as they take stock of the geopolitics in the country. And in fact, we've heard him reach the tail end of his own address.